Morning, everybody. It's Ken Phelan, the Chief Technology Officer for Gotham Technology Group, and thanks for joining me in my series of tech talks, talking about industry things that are happening, things mostly in the cybersecurity space that customers are asking about. And today, I'm lucky to have Mike Ostrowski with me. Mark is with Checkpoint, and Mark's already representing Gotham in the background. I still have a Checkpoint background. So Gotham and Checkpoint have just in case you don't know this, like a 25-year history. We were one of the first resellers coming out with them. We've been a Checkpoint partner for forever, and obviously Checkpoint has a special role in the industry as one of the founding fathers of the cybersecurity industry. So I'm excited to have Checkpoint here, talk about what they're doing because they've got some deep roots, and particularly Mark, who is in the office of the CTO over there. So Mark, why don't you do a quick intro of yourself
Oh,
and your background? Thanks.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, Ken, thanks for having me. Like you said, Gotham is a very key strategic partner for us, and we appreciate that over all those years. And similar to the history you have, I've been here at Checkpoint for this will be the beginning of my 24th year. So
Yeah.
we've shared that history together. But yeah, so I head up engineering and sales for the East for Checkpoint, and for us that means basically the tip of Maine down through the Carolinas. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do
Awesome.
and where I am.
So my thinking about this for today, because I think a lot of people, there's only one worse thing in branding than not being known. It's being known for the wrong thing. I think sometimes people equate Checkpoint with sort of this firewall company, this old
Yeah.
state company, and I know there's a lot going on over there, and a lot of sort of focus on new stuff. So I really want to talk kind of the conversation this way. I want to kind of talk about what you guys saw in your latest threat report, what some of the new things you guys see happening, because you guys are leading in that sort of analysis state. And I really want to spend some time talking about how you guys are innovating in AI, like how you're thinking about it in terms of defense, what the attackers are doing, sort of really focus on Checkpoint as an innovator to kind of make people aware of all the cool new stuff you guys are doing. So does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, it sounds
All
good.
right.
Yeah,
All right.
perfect.
So let's talk a little bit about that threat report. And again, as I look through these things, I think it's one of those, the old analogy is like the frog in the water, right? That things keep changing, but sometimes they change too subtly and we don't see the big shifts. Like what kind of was surprising, or what do you sort of call out to customers when you're talking about the new things in this year's Checkpoint threat report?
Yeah. No, it's a good question, Ken. And it's funny, some things change, some things stay the same, right? I mean, that's kind of the reality that we're in. I think the easiest thing to call out is that from an attacker perspective, uh, the the main goal of attackers these days is and we see, I think it was a 58% increase, I think, year to year for info stealers, or just
Yep.
basically looking to gain information in terms of credentials and obviously to use information, whether it's for ransom or for whatever reason. um that continues to be the biggest push, right? And I don't know, Kent, that's really changed much. That's kind of what has been sort of the theme over the past several years of how organizations have to protect their data, because their data basically is their business, and obviously the attackers are looking for that exact data to whether to create that extortion or that ransom type of attack. So that's sort of what hasn't changed, although we continue to see sort of that increase.
It's a
um
two-step process, though. I think it's
yeah
funny that it's two steps right now. That it's like there's this info stealer level. People come in and steal all your IDs, but they don't use them. They go sell them, and
yeah
somebody else comes and logs in. So, like, I think you're seeing, I think it's hard to do the analysis on that when the this initial incursion doesn't leave any carnage behind, right? It's not like somebody breaks in as ransomware. It's like that whole. So I think, I mean, it is a challenge to think of it that way
yeah
about your
yeah
IDs being on the dark web.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big business now, right, Ken? I mean,
Right.
you can go back our 20 years of history of being in this space. In the beginning, it was all about disruption. It really wasn't about, stealing data and then having that data as a way to generate revenue. It was about creating disruption, and that disruption could be taking down a website. It could be anything, right? But that's evolved very much over the last couple of decades, where, to your point, right, that somebody stealing information turns into a business that they're then representing on the dark web or what have you, and that becomes something that becomes a real asset, which sounds weird to say, but then that asset then is brokered across these different sort of these certain networks, And so it's, yeah, it's hard to quantify, what an attack looks like, and then what the result of that attack is, and then when that attack and the information that was actually stolen will be used in a particular outgoing event that affects the particular brand or a company, right? So that's certainly evolved. And I think, we'll probably talk about more about, unfortunately, one of the most overused terms these days of AI, but it is important to talk about how a couple different things in the change in the past 12 months have led to different types of attacks, but certainly artificial intelligence, and we can get specific into this later
Yeah.
on, but it's changing the way that attackers are going about leveraging those particular tool sets, because think about it, it's a lot easier to create a multinational attack when you have the aid of a generative AI solution that can create the language, and it can create, the format that everybody feels is relative to them, because we're no matter where they sit across the globe. Like that really didn't exist even 3 years ago or 2 years ago. So that's evolved. And then, here at Checkpoint, we talk a lot about hybrid mesh and hybrid networks, and how people or organizations are spreading their workloads across, obviously what they have internally, but to cloud and to, cloud edge and SASE and SaaS. And I think attackers are also leveraging that sort of a diversity in compute to also create more complicated attacks. So it certainly isn't getting easier, Ken, right?
It's the old game, right, of attackers and defenders, and I think that
Yeah.
the oldest attack strategy in the world is hit them where they ain't, and I think that's
Yeah.
and we see that we've done a lot of work in traditional firewalls and IDS and all these different layers of technology, and sort of stopping or malware coming against known CVEs and like all of that stuff. So it doesn't mean it doesn't happen anymore, but to your point, like hybrid cloud is new. It's confusing, and people really don't have their postures and their controls underway, and they're mostly a lot of people are kind of sort of stumbling around in that space, to use to be a little bit mean about it.
Yeah.
And but also, like one of the things I saw in it was this more sort of attacks focus on the ESX layer, right, on the supervised layer of VMware, like that, an area we haven't normally maybe considered or protected, or because it was Linux and it was this and it was that. So I think there's a lot of motion that we have to stay up to date on. And I think that's why it's important. I recommend to all of our customers, like read these things, with an eye for like, well, what are they doing where I'm not? Find those areas that you're just not defending. And I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
that's a challenge.
It's probably fair to say, Ken, that there are more blind spots than there were in the past, right? And those blind spots can be that ESX hypervisor. That blind spot could be another really, really interesting example is how, let's say an organization adopts Microsoft as their collaboration platform. And we all know that you can add as many, widgets or aids to your M365 environment that connect back to your personal life, right? Whether you connect
Yep.
your watch, or you connect maybe your Apple email, or whatever happens to be. And that becomes a blind spot for a company, because if you're not looking into how your employees are leveraging that collaboration platform, those become blind spots where malware and other types of things like that cross over that home life versus professional life, create a potential data loss. And that data loss then directly relates to all what the attackers are trying to do, is to target those types of information. So I think you're dead on, Ken, right? That all this hybrid and the change in the way the workforce has been going through in the last few years creates more and more of these blind spots. And virtualization is not going anywhere either. And maybe it's switching from being on-prem to the public cloud, but it's still virtualization. It's still running the same platforms that you're talking about. So um,
No, it's tough. I think going back to that evolutionary story, I think we, 25 years ago, cybersecurity people were basically network people, right? They're firewall people, blocking ports, creating access lists, like doing all this stuff. They were thinking about this as a network, and that was sort of their silo, their heritage, right? They were network people, and I think as we've matured and grown this, we've talked about people, now cyber people have to be applications people, and they have to be infrastructure people and ESX people. Now they've got to be cloud people. Now, I got to train people how to do containers. And so trying to secure something you don't understand is impossible. And understanding the full scope of all this crap we've built is also impossible.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I think, really does require a lot of specialization and a lot of help. And I think that's why, to me, I think that one of the biggest, you're talking about the blind spots, one of the biggest blind spots I think we have is just trusting the cyber guys, these organizations where they've got the cyber guy. And I'm like, you can't have the cyber guy. Like, this is a team effort at a minimum. And it's probably a
Yeah.
community effort, right? It's probably
Yeah.
being a partner.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like, it reminds me, Ken, like of sort of the DevSecOps sort of journey that we're going through, right? Like that term probably wasn't even, really relevant even a handful of years ago. And now you think about that software deployment life cycle, and to your point, you're trying to secure your own code development, your own
right,
applications, but you're using code that is publicly available, and you want to make sure those repositories are also not compromised, and you're using those repositories to, like, there's a lot of pieces of that chain, right? And maybe you're outsourcing some level of that development somewhere else, and now their security becomes paramount because that now your infrastructure and your code development lives somewhere else. Like, these are things that certainly create, to your point, that specialization. Like, you need to
yeah.
understand all those components and need to be able to secure all aspects of that for sure.
Yeah, I had a long talk over steak and a couple too many bourbons with some of your guys who do third party risk inside of Checkpoint, and what an amazing job they do, and what a level of complexity. It really opened my eyes about the complexity of that stuff, which again gets down to when you really understand what has to be done to think about libraries, think about all that stuff. So but I don't have that conversation today. I want to talk about AI today. But yes,
Yeah, yeah,
at
yeah,
some point, if anybody wants to talk about third party risk and application security, talk to the guys at Checkpoint who do that work for Checkpoint. It
yeah,
is truly amazing the amount of effort they put into making sure that their supply chain is down. But so let's flip over to the AI because
yeah, yeah,
I did want to talk about this, and I do want to talk more about what you guys are doing. So
yeah.
listen, let's start with
Everything
to
is
me, I
in
break it into three things, right? The defense is one thing, right? How we make a better defense. I think you were kind of talking about how people are using it to attack us, which is interesting as well. And I think there's also, now we're using AI as a tool set, so I think it's a third tranche. So let's start with the defense part, because you guys, again, you're the granddaddy of the industry. You've been here forever. You've seen all this stuff, and I think one of the things, and I'm not a data scientist, but I play one on TV. I think, to me, like, the data is so important. I mean, so many people are claiming to be AI based, leading us to the next generation of it, of cybersecurity. But as I look at the data sets they have, they just don't have the data. And then there's other people who claim to have all the data, but they don't really have cyber data. They capture packets for a living, right? Like, to listen to some of these carriers tell me that they're going to be AI based. So maybe
Right.
talk a little bit about just Checkpoint strength in the data space. Like, what kind of data do you guys have? Explain it to people. Like, where's it coming from? What makes you guys specifically have a better data asset than the average cyber company?
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely. I think it's a very relevant point, right? That there's a lot of obviously buzz in the industry, or you don't just in our industry. There's a lot of buzz about AI across every industry, every vertical. Everybody's trying to use it, whether it's in their autonomous vehicles, whether it's like a chat bot for customer service. I mean, it's really pervasive across everything. In cyber, to your point, artificial intelligence is I think there's like two types of companies that leverage or claim they leverage AI. One type of company is saying, hey, we're using AI from an operational perspective. But then there's also companies like ourselves where not only we leveraging AI from an operational perspective, we'll get to some of the innovation stuff later on, Ken,
Yeah,
about how we're doing that and helping customers actually achieve zero trust. And there's some powerful things can come from an operational perspective, automation, what have you. But again, if you were to ask me what the biggest differentiator of Checkpoint is, it's our intelligence by far, right?
sure.
And that's my own opinion, right? And the reason why I say that is because, to your point, the amount of data and the amount of IOCs and the amount of metadata and telemetry that we're getting on a daily basis, we're talking about we're talking billions. These are big
Yeah,
numbers. This is what helps us be able to create the best prevention for our customers, no matter how they consume Checkpoint. To your point, it could be a firewall, it could be a cloud gateway, it could be something protecting a workload. It could be, an endpoint. Again, it all depends on where the consumption is. so that amount of data and that amount of telemetry that we're seeing, and probably the most important part about that is that it's super diverse. So we're not just seeing just email telemetry from email security. We're not just seeing network telemetry. We're not just seeing mobile. We're seeing telemetry across our entire platform, which really is very, very, very diverse. So when you think about the data, and then really next piece about that is about the actual, the math part of it, right? Because you
Yep.
basically need three very simply, you need like three components, right? You need the math, you need the data, you need the people, right? So from the math part, if you think about the evolution of our threat cloud, we're approaching about 100 different engines, and we can talk about some of these if you'd
Yeah.
like,
Yep. Yep.
what have you. And the number of engines that are moving to be deep learning AI based are over 50 now. So what you're seeing in our ability to deliver better prevention to our customers, right, is that we're moving and we're deprecating older engines that are doing threat prevention with these newer engines that are leveraging more deep learning based AI, right? And that just creates better efficacy and then better prevention. So you get a lot of data that's diverse,
Yep.
plus a lot better algorithmic approach. And then from a people perspective, we invest, a lot of our human capital into creating these relationships between the data and the math and then our product set. And at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. And like you said, we've been doing it for a long time. It's not new to us. I could go back 10 years and talk about how we've leveraged AI to create better prevention, and we're just continuing to evolve, every single year.
Yeah, give me some anecdotes there. I'm interested to hear about, like some of the new engines, some of the things you guys are doing that are, again, innovating, making people safer. Right? I think that's, I got it. You guys are sometimes a well kept secret. Like the kinds of new things you're doing. So like, give me a couple of those.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. So we have one of the new engines that we have is called Kronos. And a picture gives 1,000 words, right? So I'll try to describe the picture and to kind of give an idea of what that looks like. But it's an AI-based way of looking at traffic that's either coming from a malicious domain or from a benign domain, right? And if you think about like when an attack kind of kicks off, and it's a malicious-based domain, you can imagine if you picture it in your head, it goes from like 0 to 60 like really fast, right?
Right.
And
Right.
everybody gets compromised during that period of time. What happens is then, that you'll see that graph kind of work its way down because two things. One, people realize they're being compromised and it's not a valid domain. Number
Right.
two, technologies eventually catch up, right? And understand that now this is a malicious domain. And then it drops off to eventually to the point where it becomes useless. And then the attacker creates a new one, right? So
Right. Right.
that's sort of the attack. So the other part of that picture is like when you have a benign domain, it's very consistent, right? There may
Right.
be little peaks and valleys based upon like whatever sort of like normal variables will be. So when you think about that, right? So what this AI-based engine does for what's called Cronus is that we actually look at the signaling of the DNS and we look at the signaling of these domains. And when we see these gigantic increases of an unknown domain that may have information that correlates to another malicious domain, we're able to prevent that from a zero-day perspective because that signal breaks the pattern of what valid domain traffic should look like because we know what the baseline of benign traffic looks like. So that's like one example of how AI is really playing a major role in preventing attacks is because we don't have to really the domain is almost like not really even really part of it, right? It's the signaling of how the domain is being used that creates that preventative nature. And that leads to, a couple 100,000 more preventions per month for our customers, right? That's a
That's
big
awesome.
number. It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
huge number, right? So that's like a really good example. I'll give one more quick one, and then we can probably you may have some
Yeah.
follow-ups. But we also do a thing called deep brand clustering as well. So you think about a lot of these info stealer attacks or a lot of these phishing attempts. What do they go after? They go after all the big brand names, right? And I won't expose them on on this, right? But we know who the big brands are. And I'll go back to my earlier statement, like where you also have this global attack framework, right? So they're not just attacking a brand in the US, but they're attacking that brand in every single country. And they're using AI to help create that phishing attempt to be more relevant in that brand in that specific country. So what we also do too is we look at, from an AI perspective, we can look at the domains that are associated to these brands, and we can use AI to distinguish that particular brand falls outside of what the brand actually is from a legitimate perspective. And we look at that from, again, if you visually think about it, all the correct requests are all tightly knit together. And now you see the outliers of all of the attack domains that have been creating for these phishing campaigns. And because we're creating that sort of clustering, we're able to then give our customers better protection around phishing, for example, in email, because we know what the brand is actually using, and all the outliers are the ones that we can block from a malicious perspective. So that's just a couple of examples of these engines that have really evolved over time, and really leveraging and harnessing the power of AI to give better prevention, again, whether it's email or from a network perspective, doesn't really matter, because that engine is being used regardless of how that domain is being queried, across the network or through the cloud or what have you.
Yeah, what I love about both of those is it really points to this requirement, which is also strength of checkpoints, which is the sort of velocity that we have feedback when we make these changes. Because I think, again, what I hear a lot of companies talking about, we're AI, and you look at the basic product that they're selling, and it's, they have an AI trained algorithm somewhere within this box that makes, decisions, whether it's an endpoint product or a network analysis product, whatever. So it's basically there's some sort of AI in the product that makes decisions, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is you guys have this giant AI machine that's looking at this data, and then, very importantly, feeding this back. Because to your point, all these attacks come and go so quickly. Like a standalone AI engine sitting on a customer site is not what we need. What we need is a community. We need a tribe. We need people that we can work with together, and we're all sharing that intelligence and moving forward with it. So I think, that velocity part's so important to you guys. And I think, I guess maybe you could talk about like how you guys see that problem, how you feed it into customers and make those changes. Because you gave a good example already about how you're stopping all those attacks, but I think just philosophically, you guys are building new products to use the AI. You're doing like like that commitment. Do you have other examples of ways you're changing that structure or?
Yeah. I think no, I think you sort of explained it well, right? That there's a velocity is like a requirement because things change so fast. Like even that example I gave, right? That malicious domain may only be it may be like causing compromise for like hours before it becomes right. So if you miss that from a velocity perspective, you have a whole bunch of compromise, and then by the time like you recognize it as being malicious, it's too late because the door's already been open for a period of time. So having that speed is super important. And to your point, like for us, our intelligence isn't like a product, right? It isn't like, hey, you need to buy. Like it's inherently in part of everything that we do. So
Right.
that what customers can be comfortable with is, again, whether they're using us from a network perspective or using us from a cloud perspective or using us from an email security or even on the endpoint, is that intelligence is baked in, that velocity is baked in, so that regardless of how it's being consumed, you've got that level of that baseline of protection. The only thing I guess I could add to Ken to that as well is I look at AI and cyber like in the four quadrants that you kind of already kind of outlined a few of them. You've got the attacker aspect, which we kind of talked about, the defender aspect, which we just kind of spent a little bit of time talking about. And I'm a big sports guy. I played almost every sport, but I'm playing a lot of tennis and played a lot of basketball in my life. And I always thought, it was always easier being on offensive, right? Because the defenders really never know what you're going to throw at them. But I will say though, like in the era of this sort of AI cybersecurity area, that the playing field is getting more level, right? Because we can leverage AI to be a much better defender, even though the attackers are using it. It's become a little bit of even though it's a force multiplier for the attackers, it's also a force multiplier for us as well from a defender perspective. So it's interesting to see how that will play out. So that's kind of like the two things on the left that I talk about. The two things on the right of like sort of a four box would be how companies are actually leveraging AI in their environment, right? So if you're a healthcare company, which by the way is one of the most one of the most attacked areas from our security report, you have to assume that physicians are using AI to help generate a lot of different things, maybe even a diagnosis or maybe it's for certain creating, emails to their patients, right? That's a big concern for healthcare, right? Because like you're leveraging AI in a way that maybe from a, from a government a standards perspective may have not had thought about, right? So you got to think about how do you secure AI as a company leveraging AI themselves. And then the fourth part of that four box in the bottom right would be, how do you leverage AI as a tool, Ken, like you mentioned, to create better security outcomes too. So that's kind of how I look at sort of cyber and AI. And I think that velocity point is important for every one of those areas, right? You need to
Yeah.
be, have a high rate of velocity and effectiveness from a defense perspective. You have to be able to react to how customers are actually, or people within your own organization are leveraging AI. You got to be quick on that front. And then you also have to be quick in terms of developing tools to keep up with those other four areas, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like how I see the intersection of cyber and AI together.
So let's talk more about the generative stuff. Because I think, like
Yeah.
again, part of this being an older guy too. Like I was there when they rolled the first PCs into the data center, and they were like, do we really need these things? They look like toys. So I mean, change is always a thing. And I said to people because they're very concerned about the generative AI creating negative effects inside of companies and giving bad data. And I think some of it's, honestly, some of it's sort of fake news. But but at the same time, it's just such valuable tools that I almost feel like we're fighting with a bunch of accountants using calculators about the first spreadsheet. So I mean, how do you at Checkpoint? I know you guys have some products in the space. Like, what do you think the right guardrails are? What do you tell customers about the use of generative AI? How do they approach this? What I think is a great resource, obviously with some potential downside, but effectively.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. This is a good one. We can unravel this in a lot of different areas for sure. Um, I maybe just from a very super high level, like we can kind of break it down in two areas and probably talk about the first one. It's probably more applicable to most people because you have like, how can you create um better productivity leveraging tools like ChatGPT and Gemini, right?
Yeah,
There's a real business driver for that.
sure.
But then you have lots of the concerns you brought up, right? Is your data making its way into a public,
Right.
LLM, right? Are you getting information back that's not necessarily accurate? Is the LLM that you're interfacing with, is it having its own challenge in terms of having valid data? Like those are like real things. So that's like one area, which we'll probably talk more about. The other area is like companies are obviously developing their own LLMs as well. So they want to
Mhm.
have the same sort of guardrails and protections for those large language models that they're building because they don't want the inverse of that happening to them, right? They don't want their
Right.
data being poisoned or their data being siphoned, right? So two high level kind of ways of looking at it. I think where we're helping most customers right now are to operationalize generative AI in their environments.
Right.
Like very simple, right? Like providing DLP and governance and compliance around what information that they're sending potentially to a
Right.
ChatGPT of the world, right?
Yep.
So think about anything from a prompt perspective, not just about, are we making sure that from a data loss perspective, stuff's not leaving, but we're actually building a dashboard so people like a CISO or people from a security perspective understand how their organization is leveraging these tools just to get a better idea of like what governance and guardrails they need to put in place without reducing that productivity that these tools come from, right?
Right.
So that's probably the biggest area right now that we're helping our clients with because it's a big challenge for them. One, they don't know what they don't know. They can either turn it on or turn it off, but there's a happy medium in between. And that's something that we're spending a lot of time with is helping customers through that journey as they adopt more of these public tools while not squelching the productivity that comes from them.
Yeah, I just think there are some super good outcomes. I hate to see customers turning it off. I'm like,
Yeah.
look, you need guardrails, you need conversations, you need things about this, but being the company that says we will not move to spreadsheets, we're staying on calculators, is just not a good forward-looking motion. I feel like we have to decode it, but a lot of it is just people and tools and how they interact with it, and how they use it, all that stuff. But I like the DLP stuff. That to me that sounds like a big part of the problem, but it also is just look. I think we've had this problem. I think since the invention of the internet, people cut and pasting, people don't understand how to create individual content. The art of writing narrative has been lost generationally, I believe. So, I think that it's just
Yeah,
hopefully this fixes it.
yeah,
Interesting.
no doubt.
All right. Anything else on the generative AI part? Do you think are there are there some new things coming out from Checkpoint? What are you doing in that space?
Yeah, no, I mean, not maybe not specific about that use case, but also think about how generative AI can help us, from a threat prevention perspective, right? So
Right.
think about, um, how, one of the biggest challenge, like it's so sort of an old, again, we're dating ourselves again, Ken,
Yeah.
but when I get the old adage of like IPS, right?
Right. Right.
Create, turning on protections, turning off protections, and understanding like, there's a new attack, I didn't have it turned on. So generative AI is going to play a role in that as well, right? Where, we can create some level of autonomous enablement of protections, right? Around
Yep.
context. So generative AI is going to play a big role in that as well. So it's kind of behind the scenes versus like upfront protecting a chat GPT, but generative AI will play a role in sort of that as well from a protection perspective and creating some level of autonomous prevention. Generative AI will most definitely out at CPX, out in Vegas this year, our big kickoff. If you're not familiar with Checkpoint, it's our
Yeah.
big, we do it a few places across the globe. Um, we talk a lot about things like policy advisor and ways of leveraging generative AI as a tool for Checkpoint to help customers get to tighter policies, that zero trust methodology, simple things like, am I using too many rules and too many objects? Like these are areas in which generative AI is currently playing a role within our product set. So to
That's great.
help our policy creators and our administrators and our CISOs reach their goals, right? And their goals are about, reducing their attack surface, reducing their risk, streamlining their policies, understanding. And those are areas where like, that we're already heavily invested in. In fact, you can ask, your console today,
Mhm.
hey, how should I create this rule? And we'll kick back and give you a response saying, yeah, well, this rule's already number XYZ, you can add to this. And oh, by the way, do you want me to do that for you? Right. And then
Right.
via an
Right.
API, we can make those changes. So generative AI is playing a huge role as a tool, for the common sort of like, creating narratives, like you mentioned, but it's also
Mhm.
playing a huge role for companies like Checkpoint, creating better outcomes for our customers and leveraging the power and that ability to create better outcomes, um, reducing that operational burden, right? So that really excites me, Ken, because those are challenges that anybody in cyber, regardless of what kind of platform you're running, needs that help because like the amount of data is not getting less; it's only exponentially increasing.
Yeah, and as we've built this complicated environment where infrastructure is code and security is code and everything is code, like we don't have enough coders. Like I think AI stepping in as a really
Yeah,
great code generator is really going to help people, get achieve some of the things they're looking for without going into like a whole room full of sec DevOps people who aren't going to manage it properly anyway. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's a growth there. Do you think? I
1000%.
mean, we talked about the attackers before, and we are seeing this big. Well, actually, I don't think we've seen the peak of this wave at all. This concept of AI and generative code writing great phishing emails. Like I think we're just on the cusp of that. I think they're gonna rewrite that AI code to kind of go through everyone's LinkedIn, get personalized, get super targeted, well researched email at scale is heading our way. I don't think we've seen that wave crest at all. But there is this sort of background about uh, other uses for attackers in AI. They're going to improve their velocity. They're going to improve their attack patterns. I mean, are you seeing that? Are you preparing for that? I think there's a concern that we're going to see this, sort of Uber AI hacker, right? That's once they get in, they have this great tool set in front of them. Is that on your list of futures, or is that something you think is already happening?
Yeah, it's already happening. We talked a little bit about this at CPX too, where we're already seeing campaigns that are using these tools to create better campaigns. And I
Yep.
mentioned it, kind of kicked it off. creating that better multinational global type of attack. So
Right.
we're already seeing it. Yeah. And there's absolutely no doubt in that. So, I think without being too sort of doomsday, Ken, to your point,
Yeah.
I don't think attackers maybe have even seen the full potential of what they could be doing in the future. And I think that's why it's so important that when you think about who you're going to partner with, in terms of providing the level of cybersecurity that's going to be required to defend against those new types of attacks, because the way that these attacks are emerging are, the speed has not slowed down. And I say this a lot, Ken. When during the sort of the COVID period of time, I thought for some reason I had thought like the amount of attacks were going to sort of be up, like peak in that era to some extent, because think about it, for a period of time, everything was digital, like because we had no choice, right? That was what was going on. And obviously, from an attack perspective, that was a window of opportunity for attackers because they knew that the attack surface was artificially, expanded because of the consumption digitally. But the reality is, Ken, is that it never stopped. Like
Right.
COVID
Right.
was just the tip of the iceberg, and now it's like it's continuing to move very, very aggressively, from an attacker perspective, and we see that in our security report. And definitely take a peek at it if you haven't looked at it. So yeah, Ken, I think your point is dead on, that AI is going to become a more of a force multiplier than we probably even realize. And, when you make that decision of who you're going to partner with, I think, Gotham, you guys are a perfect example of somebody who's always thinking about that. And you guys are always kind of pushing the envelope of like what that's going to look like. And then, that's how you guys are be able to provide all that value to your customer base, because these things are happening very quickly. And obviously, to get together with, with us and you guys, we're constantly figuring out how to bring that to our customers together as well. So there's no question that attacks are going to get more complicated. So our technology has to keep up at that same velocity, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and the attacks, I think they're multidisciplinary. Like I think that's one of the things that's changing with this
Yeah.
AI and this automation world, that it's not just, a guy who's a database guy is going after your database, a guy who's a networks guy, like because they have these great tool sets, it's that old, you know, the best chess player in the world is not a person. The best chess player in the world is not a computer. The best chess player in the world is a pretty good chess player with a pretty good computer in front of them. And that's
Yeah.
the kind of hacker we're looking at, who's a pretty good hacker with a pretty good tool set involved with them and with the AI and everything else. And I think, then that leads us down a whole different conversation in my mind about if the attacks are multidisciplinary and they're moving in multiple, against data, against networks, against all these elements, you know, all the more reason to kind of understand your platform story, right?
Yeah.
One's, it's not about having the best possible cloud posture management. You should have the best possible cloud posture management, but at the end of the day, all of this stuff has to integrate. And I think that's one of the things Checkpoint's done so much work at.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's no doubt. Yeah. I mean, I think, I'll go back to what I said before, that, our biggest competitive differentiator in the market is our intelligence, and then how that gets consumed based upon how our customers consume it. But I also think this approach for, that Checkpoint, we've talked a lot about this open garden approach, where we want to integrate with the best products and companies that also are providing, superior prevention for their
Yep.
customers as well, right? And so when you
Yep.
take a solid platform like Checkpoint, right, that does a lot of very important things, again, whether it's mobile, email, network, go through the whole entire platform. But we also have great strategic partnerships and integrations, on the cloud side, for example, where we can bring the best of that and have that integration and create that better story, right? So that whole open garden approach tied with a strong platform, I think is relatively unique in the market, because a lot of folks are saying, hey, you need to be 100% platform based, and we're the platform. That's it.
Yeah.
But that's discounting that other organizations and other vendors are also doing great things. That if you
Right.
have a tight integration, not just like, hey, I'm sharing logs, but an integration
Yeah.
where you're creating, preventative actions on the fly. These are types of things that I think, are going to lead, to your point, a better protection for that multidisciplinary attack, right? And there's no question that, that's sort of, that falls into that whole hybrid mesh of Checkpoint, right? That the hybrid mesh is a way for us to provide the best prevention across all different aspects of our platform, but having tie-ins to our intelligence, having tie-ins to these other open garden vendors, that's what's going to provide the best prevention to be able to thwart these larger, more sophisticated global attacks. There's no question in that at all.
Awesome. All right, I think we're coming up on my time here that I have. If anybody who's listening, I know some people are listening live. If they've got questions, they can send them into the coordinator, to Ali, or we can take those questions. But Mark, just to keep it on you for a second. I mean, so if you look down the road 2 years from now on this, like, what is there a place you think Checkpoint's going to be like? What? Paint me a happy story, because we can doom and gloom enough. Tell me about
Yeah.
a way this would look like the right customer would be using these technologies effectively going forward.
Yeah. No, it's definitely easy to kind of get down that doom and gloom path, right? But I think, I would look at it this way: is that Checkpoint's making a lot of investments in strategic partnerships, like I mentioned. We'll continue to make a lot of investments in terms of providing the best prevention, and a lot of measures you see out there that are third party tested. You see us always being at the top. And I think when you think about the picture 2 or 3 years down the road, we're in a situation where our productivity from an employee perspective, no matter what vertical we're in, our productivity is going to go up because of these tools that are available. And I think from a security perspective, the future is bright in terms of the investment is in our platform to then provide that
Yeah.
protection for that increase in productivity that we're going to see, you know, as sort of just a global presence, right? So that's kind of like probably a very very poignant point, right? That the velocity in which providing better prevention is should be a step ahead of the productivity that's going to come for these increased tool sets. So I think we're committed to do that, and you can see that we're not just committed in one area. Like, we're committed in lots of areas. We're committed in the collaboration tool space. We're committed in the email space. We're continue to be committed in the network space. Very, very strong partners and integrations on the cloud space, as well as our own network security and application security. We made an awesome an amazing acquisition, around attack surface management and external risk management. So now, not only combining into what is sort of part of the hybrid mesh of an organization, but now looking at threat actors and where are they planning campaigns and looking through external factors and dark web and understanding what the landscape looks beyond just themselves, and then doing active takedowns and things like that, so to prevent the next big attack on a particular organization. So when you think about that, you're not only preventing and looking at what's inside, but also what other people are looking at a particular organization. So I really do think, to your point, Ken, you could have a lot of doom and gloom in terms of like the attackers are getting more sophisticated and they're leveraging these tools to create more sophisticated attacks. But on the other hand, like I mentioned before, that same force multiplier exists for folks like Checkpoint and obviously partners like you with Gotham, that we're using that same technology and that same innovation to drive that same prevention, both inside as well as from an external perspective. When you combine those two things together, you can be very confident that you'll have the best security posture you can possibly have.
Yeah, look, it's a dangerous world, but you got to find your people, got to find the right tribe,
Yeah,
get in it, get
you get
surrounded
it.
by an
Yeah,
ecosystem of people to help you out. Awesome. All right.
100%.
I didn't get to see any questions come in, but anything else you want to end with, Mark? I really enjoyed this. Thanks for
Yeah,
doing
no,
this.
no, no, not at all. I think we covered a lot. No, I super appreciate, obviously, the invite, and I'd love to come back and do it again. And of course, thanks to all the Checkpoint customers out there, and I appreciate obviously the partnership and long-standing partnership with Gotham. And yeah, have a good rest of the week.
We appreciate you as too. Thanks for coming on, Mark. Thanks for partnership. All right. Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining, and I will see you all. You know how to get your reps if you need to talk to somebody. Thanks. Bye.